All right, everyone. So today we're going to go over programming strategies for lifters who are short on time. So whether that's yourself or someone else, we're just going to go over how we can adjust a program so that we can still train. So we're going to go over who's the strategy for, why we might want to do this, how to actually do it, and then an example of me putting this in practice with someone else. All right, so I already went over what the video is about. It's adjusting the program for people who are short on time. So who's it for? As I just said, people who are short on time. And why we might want to do that, there's a couple of reasons. One, it's mainly going to be easier to meet ourselves or someone else in the middle and meet us where we're at versus trying to force something so that we can make progress. And what I mean by that is if we were doing, let's say, 5 times a week training, six, whatever, and we didn't have a job then, let's say, but now we have a full-time job, or now we're a full-time student. It might be unrealistic to expect that we could train 5 to 6 times a week again. So instead of forcing that 5 to 6 times a week because it worked before, it's probably better to just meet ourselves where we're at and maybe reduce the days a little bit. Do whatever we need to get in consistent training. And the second one could be helping with someone who thinks that they might have to quit. And what I mean by that is sometimes we might feel like, well, we did this before and it worked really well, so we have to do it again because it worked really well. And I think sometimes it can be easy, especially as an athlete, to think, well, if I have to change that, I'm not going to make good progress. I might as well just quit powerlifting entirely, right? Maybe I'll just go do bodybuilding full time for now. And you could do that if you want to. But I think powerlifting and bodybuilding, or even just like, I don't know, like sprinting, I think those things can coexist pretty well on lower volumes. We could still make progress. So we probably don't need to actually jump ship and quit. We might just have to get a little creative with how we can do things and seeing what's the bare minimum amount of work we need to get stronger and still enjoy what we're doing. So now we can get into how to actually do this. So this is kind of like one step before actual strategies to implement, but they're very important. So the first one is going to be deciding on your goal, meaning, let's say you can't decide between powerlifting and bodybuilding, but we need to chop the program down somewhere because now you don't have enough time. You need to be pretty sure of what your 1A goal is. Is it to get stronger and compete on a platform competitively or even non-competitively, or is it to get as big as possible, focus more on aesthetics and posing and all that, but we're doing the strength work kind of on the side. The reason it's so important to define that and we can't kind of pick both at the same time in an instance like this is it's going to decide what we keep and what we might reduce or have to get rid of entirely. So an example is with powerlifting, we might get rid of some muscle groups for accessories, like maybe it's calves or biceps. Maybe we reduce those down because those muscle groups aren't playing a very big role in the main lifts, squat, bench, and deadlift. So if we got rid of them because we had to for time, it's probably not going to affect someone's strength outcomes, right? But if you're undecided and maybe you actually wanted bodybuilding goals, and now we got rid of calves or biceps, and those are muscle groups you really cared about bringing up, well, now we have a conflict there because the goal's kind of undecided, and it makes it really difficult to decide what we need to get rid of or whatnot. So ask yourself, once you have a goal, what do we absolutely need to make this progress? And what do we not need, or what could we maybe get away with doing less of? Second thing we need to do is adjust our expectations depending on the decisions we make. So I'll go over a lot of different things that we can do here, but if we make a really big decision to save ourselves some time depending on circumstance, like maybe it's reducing workload entirely, like cutting the volume in half or the frequency, that's something that could really affect your ability to express top end strength. So you might not feel as good as you did before. Like your technique, if you go from benching 4 times a week to 2 times a week, it's probably not going to feel as sharp. Maybe it will initially, but over time, comparatively, it's probably not going to, especially if you're like a really efficient bench presser with like a shorter range of motion. Um, or if we reduce the volume, let's say you were doing 20 sets of benching before or whatever, now you have to do 10 or even 8. That's probably going to affect your rate of progress. So if we can adjust the expectations to almost expect them, maybe strength to slow down, or hope for the best but be prepared if it doesn't really pan out like that, and focus on, let me just get in consistent training, because at the end of the day that's the most important thing, then you're probably going to be a lot better off at adapting to this new training style versus having the same expectations as when circumstances were different. And the final kind of mini strategy or thing we need to consider before we actually start implementing stuff is what you or an athlete needs right now doesn't define or lock you in to what you do in the future. Meaning, if you need to reduce frequency, volume, whatever right now, that doesn't mean it needs to be like that till the end of time. Especially if it's like a temporary thing that came up and someone doesn't have as much time to train. Well, we know once that thing goes away, we could probably go back to something similar to what we did before. And if it worked before, it probably is going to work again, or at least some rendition of that. So don't lock yourself into that. And in the same light, if what you were doing before worked really well before, that doesn't mean that we can't get away with doing less and still make progress. So both things are true in that circumstance. Things can always change, and you're not locked into whatever you're doing forever. So now let's get into some actual strategies that you could implement. So the first thing is going to be probably the biggest one, and that's going to be reducing workload. So when I say workload, I'm really talking about like sets multiplied by reps multiplied by weight, just like total everything. What are we doing? So I'm going to include frequency, sets, and reps within that. And I say this is the biggest decision to make because these are the things that are going to influence our strength, how the bar feels in our hands, on our back, how our technique feels. It's going to influence that the most, whether it's volume, whether maybe if it's even intensity, frequency. So that's an option, but I'd probably say it's closer to one of the last things I do because it is a bigger scale change. And with frequency, we could still maintain lift frequency, but reduce the amount of days in total, and we could still get a good amount of progress in with that. Something else we could do that's kind of on the opposite end of maybe risk or how it's going to affect is just using strict time constraints when you're in the gym. So timing your rest, not being on your phone, maybe you have an app that blocks screen time, or you just don't talk to people as much. If you cut down on a few interactions, or you just chop the amount of time on your phone in half, or you're just not resting for 10 minutes between each set, you're probably going to save a lot of time just by doing that. But if you try that and maybe things are still taking too long, then we can try changing some other things. And something else we can do is, if we're talking mainly about like squat, bench, deadlift stuff, we can put the top set last by using ascending sets. So when I say put the top set last, I mean normally in a structure where maybe someone has as much time as they need to on a primary day, so like the day we're trying to really evaluate where strength's at, we're usually going to have something that's like a heavy set first and then some lighter sets after. So a top set and then back down sets. Maybe it's one set of 3 and then 4 sets of 5 minus 15% from the top set of 3, whatever it might be, right? A super easy way that we could adjust things is just by putting that top set of 3 last, or it could even just be second, third, fourth, whatever it needs to be. If you move it later on, it's going to reduce time because we're essentially getting rid of some warm-up sets because now we're counting them as working sets, being those first few ascending sets. And with that too, we could also just prioritize rep work a little bit more and we could still keep the same structure. Like we could do maybe a 3x5 and then a 1x2 or a 1x3, but maybe that 1x2 or one set of 3 isn't the top set. Maybe it's the first or second set of 5. And progressing the rep work is probably going to give a little bit of a different stimulus than just focusing on the top end. And maybe that's what you or a lifter needs. And at the end of the day, volume's probably the most important thing for getting us stronger, at least aside from intensity, because intensity, it's specific to powerlifting, right? We're on the platform, we're lifting really heavy, so of course intensity needs to be there too, but volume's right up there with that because we're practicing our technique frequently with weight in our hands. So just like the more we do that, we're probably going to get a little bit better at powerlifting compared to if we weren't doing that. So if we can progress those volume sets, that's probably going to help out with that a little bit more. And ascending sets in particular can allow someone to accumulate some high quality technique practice because we're getting in more reps before the heavy work. Now, with that being the case though, sometimes if the top sets last, so let's say it's a 3x5 and a 1 set of 3, and that 1 set of 3 is your like indicator set, the set we're using to really see how your strength is trending across time. Doing that last could temporarily nerf or like reduce your strength output, but that doesn't mean we got weaker. It means our ability to express our strength is dampened because we just accumulated fatigue from the sets prior. Now, I said it can do this. I didn't say it always does this because for some people, ascending sets are actually beneficial in that we get that skill practice and it helps them just feel better with heavier weight. And also for people who maybe they have some sort of adrenaline dump, like they get really hyped up for a top set of some kind, by doing their back down stuff first, that will also probably get in some more productive back down rep work because they're not super fried after doing something heavy first, now that heavy things last. So overall, for someone like that, it could even improve the quality of their session as a whole by just making this quick little flip. All right, so let's say we use the ascending set strategy. What if there's an instance where you've noticed that by doing the volume first, it definitely does dampen your output on the top end? How can we eventually test strength if we want to within this very constrained time system? There's two options that come to mind for me, and there's probably a lot others. But what we can do is we can either incrementally move the top set up each week, or we could just flip it on the last week. So the first example here, moving it up each week. So let's say we do a 3x5 and then a single in week 1. Week 2, we move it up in the order, 2x5 and a single, then 1 back off set. Week 3, just 1 set of 5 and a single, 2 back off sets. And then week 4, we do a single, 2 to 3 back off sets. Maybe you do some sort of deload and you just do 2, whatever it might be. Now this can work because we're naturally building momentum because we're peeling off fatigue from the set order changing. So because we're not doing 3 sets of 5 if it's something that's like really fatiguing for us beforehand, now we're doing 2, now we're doing 1. We could even keep the RPE on that single the same, and just by virtue of it moving up in the order, it's probably going to be coming in a little bit stronger because we're not under this immense amount of fatigue. Now the second option we could do is we could just keep it, that's supposed to be week 4, we could just keep it at a 3x5 and then a single across weeks 1 through 3. And then in week 4, we could just flip it so that the single's first. Now this might be something you do for someone who already does ascending sets, like not because they're short on time. For that person, you might want to keep those 3 sets of 5 first for majority of their blocks since we know it actually works. And then in that last week, you could just flip it so that the single's first and then see, like where strength is at. Now, another caveat to this is if we're close to a meet and we need to really try and test like top end strength, you might want to do this strategy if you do something like this, where you gradually move the single up in the order, or even this one. You might want to test that out like a block or 2 out and see if it actually works. All right, and then now we can get into some other strategies aside from just like ascending sets that are a little bit quicker. So some obvious ones, we can drop some non-essentials like certain accessories, like I mentioned before. we're doing powerlifting, maybe we can get rid of some of the bicep work, calves, maybe even some of like the just isolation work in general, like it's triceps or whatever it might be. And we could also maybe cut down on some redundant warm ups. Like maybe we don't need to do two stretches to open up the backside of our hip. Maybe we could just do one. Or maybe we can just walk on the treadmill or do some kind of bike. Just so we're doing like maybe just a 5 to 10 minute warm up, break a sweat, and then get right into everything. And that also applies to like the barbell lifts themselves too. Like maybe you don't need to do like 7 or 8 warm ups. Maybe you just need like 4 or 5. So just getting rid of like stuff that maybe isn't absolutely necessary and just doing what we actually need. Utilizing compound movements. So maybe you were doing a lot of isolation work before, but maybe now we can just shift that. So let's say we were doing like a pec fly, a tricep extension, and a lateral raise or a front raise. Maybe we could just do like a slight incline Smith machine bench press or slight incline dumbbell press, working all three muscles. Could even make it close grip too and get a little bit more triceps. Whatever you need to do there. It might just be a little more efficient. And then this is a more general thing, but utilizing the minimum effective dose of volume. So what's the least amount that I need to progress? Maybe it's building muscle, or maybe it's just accessories that maybe just help with making your squat feel better, or your bench press feel better, whatever it might be. And by reducing the volume, maybe we can bump up the intensity to kind of make up for that so that we're still getting in a strong enough stimulus to get bigger or whatever the goal is. Something else we can do, it kind of relates to the compound movements, is we can use semi-specific barbell variations with secondary benefits of hypertrophy. So what I mean by that is something like an incline barbell bench press or a barbell RDL. If I use the barbell RDL, we have a bar in our hands, so it's kind of specific to like a conventional deadlift, for example, because we're deadlifting with a bar in our hands. Except with the RDL or stiff leg deadlift, we just have a straighter knee. So it's still probably going to help with the conventional deadlifts because we're really working on the hinge component, so pushing our hips back. But we can also use this to grow our hamstrings a little bit more, or our glutes in this case, whatever it might be, because we're making it a stiff leg deadlift and we're not treating it as maybe like a normal deadlift. So it's somewhat specific to a conventional deadlift in this case, but we can still get some hypertrophy or building muscle adaptations out of it still. And then, like I said, for bench press, maybe it's like a close grip feet up bench press, or even like a Larson press could work too, or something a little less specific like an incline barbell press. And honestly, it doesn't even have to be a barbell. It could just be a dumbbell press, just some kind of pressing motion in general. Like that's probably going to be better than nothing in that case. Or for hinging, maybe it's a hyperextension. Just like whatever you kind of have to do, that'll still kind of help with practicing some aspect of the skill that we need, which is a squat, bench, or deadlift in this case. We can also pick some load limiting variations that require less warm-up time because the peak intensity, so like the weight on the bar or whatever the machine is a little bit lower. So maybe that looks like going from something like a heavy dumbbell press to I don't know, like a dumbbell fly, if that's like a change you need to make. I can't think of one off the top of my head right now, but just picking more load limiting variations. Or maybe instead of a bilateral RDL, maybe you go with a single leg RDL where you just need one dumbbell. And it could actually be the same exercise, and maybe you implement some more tempos and pauses. And this has a secondary benefit of improving control with technique, or it could even help with maybe like managing and working through some pains or whatnot. So there's a lot of options. Like I said at the beginning, kind of have to get creative with it, see what the athlete or see what you actually want to do, like what's going to make this fun, and how can we creatively fit things together so that it works. And something else we could do is a antagonistic superset, meaning like a muscle that's on muscles that are on opposite sides of the same joint. So classic one, you could superset a tricep and a bicep exercise with one another because it's probably not going to affect the performance of both of them to a significant degree, and we can still get volume in for those respective muscles. Could also do drop sets too if that's something that we enjoy. Um, Limiting unilateral work if possible, or at least the set count of those. Now, the reason I say that is because unilateral work, of course, if we're doing one side at a time, that's going to take more time than doing both sides at the same time. But maybe it's a case where it's like load limiting unilateral work, because that's going to happen by virtue of it being one leg or arm at a time. We could just limit the set count and just do like 1 to 2 sets, maybe instead of 3 to 4. We could also pick exercises that don't require as much setting up or as much thought. So instead of doing like a 45-second cluster deadlift, maybe we can just do a 10-second cluster deadlift instead. That's something simple that doesn't require as much set, or not as much setup in this case, but just as much rest time, and we can still get that benefit of resetting the deadlift and practicing our setup in this case. We can also change the exercise order if we're looking to limit load. So maybe it was something that required a lot of warming up. Maybe it was like a, I like some, you mean you probably wouldn't put an RDL last, but just for the sake of an example, if you put an RDL last in a workout, you're not going to be able to use as much weight on that. Maybe this is for someone who's already really skilled with hinging, so if they do it later, it's probably not going to affect their coordination as much as someone who's newer. And then because it doesn't require as much load, then it doesn't take as long for them to do. Again, there's probably better examples for that, but just to kind of get the thoughts going on what you can do with that. You could also have optional days that don't interfere with progress. So I'll get to this in a minute, but with an example. But something that I did with one of my guys, Ian, is we put all of the squat, bench, deadlift stuff on 3 days throughout the week, and then we made day 4 an optional accessory day. So no squat, bench, deadlift stuff, but if he can get it in, cool, it'll help. It'll help with him getting bigger, and maybe there's a movement in there that helps make his deadlift feel better, like RDL, whatever it might be. But if he misses it, it's probably not going to matter that much in the short term for making progress. And that's actually worked out super well. So it's a day that if we can get in, cool. But if we can't, it's not going to like completely hinder our progress. Like it's not our primary day, for example. And then this is more of an option if someone's like super removed from a meet, or maybe they just don't want to do one ever and they're not competitive. Then if they want to work on something new, or there's a specific quality that we think could be brought up for long-term development as an athlete, maybe they just need to get bigger, maybe we lack some mobility somewhere or stability, whatever it might be, we can work on that first. Or maybe we really care about improving our vertical jump or whatever, we can do that stuff first if that becomes like the 1A goal now, and then do a little bit less of the powerlifting. And we can still do it, but maybe we're just more on maintenance mode now. And then last thing we can do is I wrote make them make less decisions. That could be yourself or an athlete. But what I mean by that is we can really look at this as a spectrum. Is if our program just says 3 sets of 8, RPE 8, there's kind of a good amount of thought that goes into that, because you have to think of what weight am I going to do for that? Is it from 200 to 210? Is it from 250 to 260? Whatever it might be. What did I do last week? How do I think it's going to move now? How am I feeling right now? What am I going to do there? Like there's a lot of thought that's going to go into something that's just RPE. On the other side of the spectrum, if we just use fixed loads, meaning the weight's already put in for us, so 3 sets of 8, 200 pounds, I don't have to think about anything. I know exactly what I'm doing. And then there's everything else in the middle. Here's the RPE, but it has a wide range. So maybe it's 3 sets of 8, but it's 200 to 240. Still some more decision making. Or maybe it's a a wide range and a cap. So same one, 3 sets of 8 RPE 8, 200 to 240, cap at 240, don't go over it. Or RPE cap, don't go over this RPE, but you can go under it. Or maybe it's the same exact thing but with a shorter range. So maybe it's 200 to 215, don't go over 215, and don't go over RP 8, but you can go under that. And you hopefully you get what I'm saying here. Is the more things that we add to this, we can make someone make less decisions. It's just going to take less time to get through training, one, because they don't think as long, but two, if we reduce the amount of mental fatigue that comes with making a decision, because decision fatigue's a real thing, they'll also have more energy and probably get through things a little bit quicker because they don't have to decide on things as much. So that's pretty much all I got for strategies that we can implement with that. And now we can get into an actual example of me implementing this with someone else. All right, so we're going to go over how we adjusted Ian's program. So we've kind of gone through a couple different, like I'd say two distinct changes with this program. So this is from a while ago. That's why it looks completely different. Probably like maybe 2.5 years ago. But before changing anything, he was doing 5 days a week of training, and frequency is still the same. We're doing 3 times a week bench, 1 time deadlifts, RDL on the second day, 2 squat days. A lot of unilateral work in here, but we just couldn't get to 5 days. It was really the amount of days more than anything. So we didn't have to reduce workload too much with him. But with the new split, what we did, we go to something like this, so you can see it looks a lot different, is we made this day one an optional accessory day. So before, day one had, I believe this was his primary bench, and then like some biceps, and then incline dumbbell press, whatever, some other upper body stuff. So if we missed this day one, probably wouldn't have been the best idea, because this is the day we're looking at to see if he's actually getting stronger or not. So might make it hard to see what's going on. So I obviously asked, like, hey, what days can you know for certain that you could get in? Because there's almost always at least one day, probably 2 days, that you could absolutely get training in, even if it is a little not the best, like maybe you got to go after work. Or so I asked what days he could do. In the beginning of the week, it wasn't probably going to work out more often than not. So instead, we just made day one optional, which is what we did here, and it was just all accessories. So shoulder press, chest press machine, lat pull downs, chest fly, curl of choice. And then we put his primary day a lot later in the week instead, kind of rearranged everything so that he was still benching a couple days before the primary day. And this ended up working out pretty well. We've actually kind of been on this like PR loop in terms of like the top rep set. So like his top set of 3 here, for example, has just been on a endless getting better cycle, which has been awesome for like 2 years now. Squat and deadlift a little bit similar. Squat and deadlift taking a little bit of a seat back, but I'll get to that in a minute. But now we can show like the peak of this first phase of changes that we made. So this was about 2 or 3 macro cycles, or just programs, probably like 6 months, whatever, later, and into like pretty much the same split. And we ended up with some pretty big PRs. So his bench press before we made this change was actually stuck for a little bit. We went from getting up to like 255 to then failing 255, then failing 260. So we had to make some changes. It was pretty much just boiled down to increasing some volume with some close grip bench press on a secondary day. And we also realized that he responds really well to higher intensities on bench press, so just heavier weights in general. And because he has a really long range of motion, he's got really long arms, also lower rep counts on the competition work. So like, this is what his primary day looked like back then. We have 2 singles, and then just 2 sets of 4. Now on his secondary day, though, with close grip bench press, so like I was saying, with his secondary bench press here, when he was doing close grip, we actually were doing higher rep sets. So 2 sets of 8. Just found that getting in rep work, even if it wasn't insanely perfect rep to rep, just seemed to really progress things. And it helped put on a good amount of muscle for his triceps. He seems to do well with a barbell bench press in terms of slapping on some muscle. So that's why we did that there. And he finished with a 275 bench. I want to say this was a 10 or 15 pound PR at the time. This is a little bit ago. 385 on squat, similar. I want to say it was like 15, maybe 20 pound PR. And then deadlift, this was a really big one. He ended up deadlifting 485, so that was huge. That was deadlift's kind of like his strong suit, but yeah, tons of PRs across the board, and that was with doing an optional accessory day for like 6 months in a row, and it still worked out really well. Why is that the case? Even though we were doing less, because we found something that was consistent, and he was willing to adapt to that, which is huge, and that's what happened. Now I said that was kind of part one. Part two, recently, his goal kind of shifted a little bit, and he wanted to start including a little bit more like general physical preparation work, some maybe like some hopping, some jumping, running, stuff like that. But then mainly wanted to kind of take a little bit of a break from like the powerlifting stuff. Still do it, but just not like the primary goal, and then do some more bodybuilding stuff. So, because that shifted the order of the priority for his goal, we changed the order of the accessories. Because, I mean, to put it simply, the thing you want to get better at, you should probably just be doing that first because you're going to get better at it quicker. So, before, if we compare a few days, so up top here, if I can move this around, this was the split we were working with before. So he was doing 4 days a week, had the optional accessory day, primary squat, tertiary bench on Wednesday, primary bench press Friday, and then SBD day on Sunday. So he wanted to, one, add a 5th day back in because the schedule changed again. So we added a 5th day back in. But like I mentioned, his main goal was more towards, I want to really focus on getting bigger now, but I still want to do the powerlifting stuff. It's just not my main priority right now. So, similar split, but a little bit different. We just kind of shifted some stuff around. So, if we look at this microcycle, we can see that on Monday, now, it's not just like an optional accessory day, it's his secondary bench day. So I basically just took it from being on Sunday, put it to Monday, and then I moved these things that were on Sunday back to Saturday just for some scheduling stuff. And we built the split around the bodybuilding stuff rather than building the bodybuilding stuff around the powerlifting stuff. So that's why I mentioned earlier, clearly define what the goal is. Because part of the reason why I had to put this secondary bench day here and not like here or here or here or whatever is because we need as much recovery as we can for these muscle groups that we're hitting. So I also placed the muscles that he cared about the most growing at the beginning of the week and at the beginning of the workout because we're going to be able to put the most amount of effort towards that and it's going to probably lead to better results. So we wanted to grow bigger biceps and calves and triceps. So guess what? Those things were first. If we look at what this day was before, it kind of looked nothing like this at all. It was a barbell overhead press, rows, pull downs, triceps. It was similar, but it was more towards, well, one, he wanted to do overhead press then, but more towards powerlifting, less towards focusing on like growing our biceps. But now, since he wants to do that, we put that first. And then we actually had his secondary bench like halfway through, almost towards the end of the workout. But as I'll get to in a minute, it actually ended up working out really well. But that's what we did for that day. And then for another example of just a small tweak, for something like his secondary squat day, I have him doing his deadlift first. So what we ended up doing was keeping the primary days, those lifts first, but the secondary days, that's where we kind of changed the order up. So in this case, it was primary deadlift day. So I also used the ascending sets that I mentioned earlier. Instead of doing a top set of 2 first and then back off sets, I have him doing a 5x1 cluster set, 1 set of 4, then 1 set of 2. It's quicker because the load's going to build up across the week. I helped reduce decision making by giving him a fixed load on the cluster, and there's a range here as well for both top sets. So primary deadlift, and then because he wants to grow his quads, instead of putting the secondary squat second, I put a leg extension second because it's a highly stable exercise. We're going to be able to produce a lot of force. We're going to be able to recruit a lot of high threshold motor units, and it's going to it's going to target, whatever you want to call it, all 4 heads of the quads. So that's why I picked the leg extension and I put it second. And then I put the secondary squat afterwards because this isn't his primary goal now. His primary goal is get a little bit bigger, so just a quick swap. And this has still been working out pretty well for us. So just small things like changing up the order or using ascending sets, load ranges, like whatever is needed, and just meeting people where they're at. We also have now we have a lot of like a lot more isolation stuff like single arm curls and things of that nature since he wants to get bigger. But back when we were still doing powerlifting, but on that abbreviated split, it was a lot of compound lift stuff. So single arm stuff too. So like chest press machine, leg extension, leg curl after the SPD stuff, really quick, couple sets, and then we're out of there. 2 to 3 sets, sometimes 3 here. Really pushing the RPs high towards the end of the block. And and as I briefly mentioned, this has been working out well because he actually hit a secondary day bench PR. And that's when this secondary day, the bench press was first in the workout. He had never done 240 on this day before for his top set of 4. Now he's hitting 240 for this top set of 4, and it's after doing all this tricep, bicep, and calf stuff. Regardless of why it happened, this is proof that you can still make progress even if you have to change things around. Alright, so thank you for watching this video. It was a bit of a longer one, but there was kind of a lot that we could go over. So, biggest takeaways for training with someone short on time, whether it's yourself or someone else, is we need to really identify what's the main goal, because that's going to change what you get rid of and what you keep. As I showed with Ian, his main goal was powerlifting at one point, so I had to get rid of some bodybuilding stuff. Now, his main goal is a little bit more bodybuilding, so I cut out some powerlifting stuff. It just depends on what that goal is, so you have to clearly communicate that with yourself or with your athlete, and that will make the decision-making process a lot better. You also want to decide on realistically, you have to be realistic, what can I do? Like, how much time do I have? I have an hour. And how many days a week can I train? What can I do consistently? Let's just try to get into the gym. Adjust our expectations accordingly. And then I went over a bunch of different options, but you can really do anything. You could use ascending sets. You could use supersets. You could reduce the workload if you really need to. And maybe you increase the intensity to accommodate for that. I had to do that with someone else before. I had to reduce their bench press frequency, so made up for it by making those 2 days a little bit heavier to kind of bridge that gap in the stimulus, and they still ended up doing pretty well, at least maintaining their strength. So there's a bunch of different options. It just comes down to finding the goal, eliminating what you probably don't need, keeping what you absolutely need bare minimum to make progress, make sure it's enjoyable, and make sure it's realistic. And that's pretty much all I got. So let me know if you enjoyed this. You can leave a comment if you have any questions or any other ideas of what you want to see. And that's all.